Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in today. Welcome to another edition of our case study series, this one titled Symmetrical Prepayment Advance. To start off here, I'm going to provide an overview of what the Symmetrical Prepayment Advance is. And in order to do that, I'm going to compare it to the Classic Advance, which everyone is familiar with. So starting on the left side here, you see a table showing the symmetrical and classic side by side with the product features listed below. And what you notice is most things are the same. The classic and symmetrical are both fixed rate advances with fixed terms with principal due at maturity, and they're both prepayment eligible. The key difference here between these two products is the prepayment fee, and specifically what happens to the prepayment fee if rates rise. And with the classic advance, if rates rise, you're capped at zero, meaning if you're in the money, there you can't realize a gain with the classic advance. You could prepay the advance and you wouldn't have to pay a fee. With the symmetrical, however, if rates rise enough, then when you prepay the advance and you're in the money, you can actually receive a credit. And that's going to be super beneficial depending on what your needs are on your balance sheet and what you're trying to do, what you're trying to use funding for. So we're going to throughout this presentation kind of touch on where this can come into play. But the key difference here is that this product provides you flexibility beyond what the classic can provide you in certain rate environments and certain strategies that you're trying to utilize at your institution. Okay, so now that you have a little bit of an overview here, now we're going to just touch on pricing real quick. So same thing, we're going to compare the symmetrical versus the classic, and this graph here is showing various terms out to 5 years for both the classic advance shown in green and the symmetrical prepayment advance shown in that light blue. And you can see across all terms here, we're looking at about a 2 basis point premium above the classic advance. And so we talked about you have that additional feature there with the ability to realize a gain if rates rise, and so there's value there, and so that value comes in the form of a 2 basis point premium above the classic, and really in the grand scheme of things it's very minimal. And you'll see as we talk through some of these strategies, 2 basis points may seem like a lot in a low rate environment, but 2 basis points can actually materialize in your favor substantially when rates rise. So now that we've talked about pricing and talked about the features of the symmetrical, now we're going to get into what happens in different rate environments to the value of the advance and the value that you can realize as well. So we're looking at an example 5-year advance. We're fast forwarding 2 years, and we're looking at different rate shocks to that advance, both down and up environments. So you can see on the x-axis of this chart, in a down rate environment, the classic and the symmetrical move pretty close together in terms of the prepayment fee that you would have to pay if you were going to collapse the funding. However, when you look at the up rate environments, you see the divergence in what happens with the value of that advance. With the classic, you're capped at zero. If you prepay the advance in an up 150, you prepay par, and the advance is collapsed. However, in the symmetrical, you see that value continues to rise in up rate environments. So as rates rise, the value of your advance decreases, which is a good thing for a liability. So if you prepay that advance in an up 150, you actually can realize a 2% gain on that advance. And we're going to talk about the strategies in the next few slides, but it's important to see this graphical representation to show you where there's value in different rate environments, and you can utilize your liabilities to realize that value and help your institution. All right, so now that you have the overview of what the advance is, you know how the pricing is, and you know what happens in different rate environments, we're going to look at an actual example here. And so we're going to look at a $20 million symmetrical prepayment advance, and we're going to go back in time to September of 2020 and say what happens, what would happen if you took the advance back in September 2020 and where we are today. And so you can see on the chart on the left side here, the classic advance is priced at 77 basis points in September, and the symmetrical is priced at 79 basis points. So we talked about that 2 basis point premium for the symmetrical over the classic. And that may seem like a lot at the time, but fast forward to today, the 5-year is at 120. And so what does that mean for your symmetrical? So if you see this bluish gray circle here, in this first year you paid an additional $4,000 of interest expense for the symmetrical above that of the classic advance. But you also are in the money because we talked about if rates rise, you can realize that gain on the symmetrical prepayment advance. So right now you have a $45,000 unrealized gain on this advance. So we're still holding it on our books right now in this example, but we're going to talk through the different options that you have and where we talked about the flexibility that can be afforded here in taking the symmetrical over the classic advance when it makes sense. So this first point here, you took out a 79 basis point advance. It's now 120. It's a 120 market. You can keep that advance, right? You're 40 basis points below the current 5-year, and you're 20 basis points below the current 4-year advance. So obviously, as rates rise and you have a liability, that benefits the liability, and you keep your cost of funds low. So you can keep that advance on the books and maintain your low cost of funds. Option 2, partially pay down some of that advance and realize some of the gains. So if you need earnings and need an earnings boost because of contracting margins, you can realize some of that gain and flow it through earnings, and then replace it with either low cost core deposits that you may have inflows of, or another advance. And then the last option here is you pay off the advance in full, you realize the gain, and you rebalance your deposit portfolio, similar to what we did with the partial pay down, replacing either a new symmetrical or another advance that meets your needs or core deposits. So with this, you benefit from the flexibility in different rate environments with the symmetrical advance above that of the classic advance. All right, so now bringing it all together and kind of going through a few different strategies here. We've touched on them a little bit. The symmetrical prepayment advance, we talked about, it adds flexibility above that of the classic advance. And so when you think about how you can utilize this advance, the first point being you can support earnings in a rising rate environment. So as we touched on, as rates rise, that's a benefit to your liabilities as the market value decreases. And with the symmetrical prepayment advance, you can actually realize the gain when you collapse the funding of the advance. So if you need an earnings boost, you can utilize your liabilities to help with that. Second point here, in times when you need to rebalance or restructure loan or investment portfolios, for whatever reason, if there's credit risk, if you're reaching concentration limits, and you're kind of forced to take a loss on the asset side, you can use the liability side to offset some of the impact to your income statement here. And then the last point here, if you don't need borrowings anymore, maybe you had a large increase of deposit inflows, prepaying this advance, if you're in the money, can provide an efficient way to reconfigure your liability mix. So you can realize that gain on the prepayment, boost earnings, and then replace with that new inflow of deposits at lower cost funding, so your NIM expands as well. So that can be super beneficial in certain rate environments, as well as what your balance sheet is calling for. This concludes today's presentation. Hopefully you learned something here in talking about our symmetrical prepayment advance and what it can do to benefit you. Add it to your toolkit, and when the pricing is opportunistic and your balance sheet calls for it, know that this product can add a lot of value here. So as always, if you have any follow-up questions, please reach out to myself or your relationship manager. Thanks for listening in today.